Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. It's so lovely to see you all in here. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people in the room with us today. Hello, everybody. My name is Elfy, and I could not feel more privileged to be here today with the remarkable Rosie Waterland for this conversation. Rosie is a podcaster, a comedian, a writer, and a best-selling author. And we're here today because Rosie, along with the amazing Jamila Rizvi, has released a book, Broken Brains, for anyone who's been sick or loved someone who has. I cannot stress enough just how beautiful, thoughtful, and powerful this book is as an exploration of people living with invisible conditions that impact their lives in profound ways. I absolutely loved it, and for those who don't already know yet, although I'm sure many of you do, Rosie is a storyteller who approaches writing with devastating honesty and incredible warmth. And she's really fucking funny as well, so this is going to be an absolute delight.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you, actually. I read Elfy's book when it came out. Was it last year? It was 2
years.
Year before. Oh my
yeah.
God, what is time?
I know, truly.
It's fantastic, and I was thrilled that you agreed to do this. So yeah,
that's so lovely. Before we jump into this properly, just a bit of housekeeping. So we are going to have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions for Rosie, please feel free to put them in your pocket, and then I will get a mic roving around at the end of the session. And also, just a heads up that this conversation might be challenging in some parts. We're going to cover topics of trauma and complex mental health. So please make sure that you look after yourselves, you look after each other, and if you need any more mental health resources afterwards, please reach out to Lifeline or Beyond Blue. But for the moment, let's jump into it.
Okay.
Rosie, hi, how are you going?
Cool. This is like really cool. I feel like I'm on a TV set. This is really nice. Yeah.
It is cozy. So I think we should start off with an obvious question, but possibly a quite difficult to answer question, which is, how do you define a broken brain?
Oh, wow. Well, I guess that's what Jamila and I try to answer in the book. I found it particularly difficult to define my particular broken brain, and that was something that motivated Jam and I to start working on this book, because she was diagnosed with a pretty rare brain tumour called a craniopharyngioma, which I've gotten very good at saying, about when she was 31. And that was a very clear-cut story for her, and it was a very clear-cut condition, and she was struggling with the mental health ramifications of it a few months after she'd had her first incredibly invasive surgery. She had to have a craniotomy, like your head's literally cut open. And it had caused, the tumour was in a place that had caused a lot of ongoing disabilities that she deals with. But she was really struggling mental health-wise with the fallout of it all, and she came to see me. And I was in psychiatric care at the time, dealing with a pretty bad relapse in my mental health. And we just started talking that day about a lot of the symptoms her tumour had caused, and we realised, oh wow, like we actually have a lot of crossover of things. She also mentioned the mortality rate of her tumour, and I said, like, that's the same mortality rate of someone with PTSD or complex trauma, and that really floored us both. And then she started talking about how everyone had rallied around her, and within a week of getting diagnosed there were 11 frozen lasagnas in her freezer because everyone was bringing her things. And I said, I've never gotten a frozen lasagna. And we were like, how do we both have the same mortality rate, like the same chance of death, but her story seemed so clear and focused and legitimate in a way that I felt like mine wasn't. I felt like I had a broken brain that I needed to convince people of, whereas she didn't have to approach it that way. And we sort of left that conversation knowing we wanted to write a book about it. I mean, we're both, writers, so we thought it's content. And so we, we decided, and then and it is kind of what we explore throughout the book is what constitutes a broken brain. And we went into it with thinking there was a binary. She would talk about the physical because she had the physical, and I would talk about the mental. And over the 5 years it took us to write it, we're very past deadline, we realised that was a false binary, and there was so much mental health stuff that went along with what she was dealing with, and a lot of physical stuff that went along with what I was helping with, and what we thought was clear cut and defined for her actually wasn't, and I don't think it is for anyone with a chronic ill health condition.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to jump a little bit more into that in just a moment. But do you mind also just telling me about your relationship with Jamila? Like, you say that you have this kind of funny friendship where you're very contrasting personalities, but where did you meet as well? Because I feel like maybe you met at a certain women's publication that we've all worked for.
Yeah, every woman in media has worked for at one point. We did, yeah. She gave me my first professional writing job at Mamma Mia, oh my gosh, at the end of 2012, I think I started sending them stuff, so over a decade now. I'd, gone to drama school for 3 years. I had a performing arts degree, and then I went to uni to do a creative writing degree, and so I had been studying for 6 years, and I was qualified to work in a call centre, which is what I was doing. And I started sending a few pieces in, and she gave me my first job, and we've pretty much been friends ever since. Our friendship definitely lasted longer than our time at Mamma Mia, and we are very different, but I think we do joke that we have an odd couple friendship, but that's why this book works so well, because I would never be able to approach the research and the academic side and the policy side and the politics and all that kind of stuff that Jamila was able to do. All the interviews in this book, Jamila did those. And I think she probably would have struggled a bit with the places she needed to go to do the personal storytelling she does in this book. So I was able to bring that to the table. We couldn't have written this book without each other, and I think we just we complement each other in really amazing ways. She's one of my best friends. She's the best.
Yeah, you can really tell that throughout the book. It's amazing. So I want to start off on quite a challenging idea that you kick the book off on, actually. It's this note where, so Jamila talks about being diagnosed with a brain tumour, and then you sort of swoop in, and I think even your first sentence is, "I wish I had Jamila's condition." Do you mind speaking a little bit about that idea and, like you say, the idea of not taking trauma seriously?
Yeah, in a few early drafts of the book that we gave to people to read, I was encouraged not to say that. And it is one of the first things I say. Jamila, when we decided to write the book, she's a very methodical person, so she approached it that way, and she wrote her first chapter, which started the moment she got diagnosed, and then, talked about how things went from there. And then she sent that to me and said, "Okay, now you write your diagnosis day story." And I was like, I don't know, shit, I didn't have one. And so, it was very tricky for me even to define what it was that I deal with, or what it was that I have, what my diagnosis is. I mean, there's a lot of disagreement about how to even refer to trauma that I bring up pretty early on in the book. And so from the moment I realised it was going to be difficult for me to even write that first chapter, one of the first things I thought to write was, sometimes I wish I had a brain tumour like Jamila's, because then I could point to something on a scan and just say, here's what it is, And I think I was discouraged from putting that in because it's a dark thing to think about. I craved legitimacy and understanding of her condition, but people don't really want to hear you say, like, I wish I had a tumour. But that was, I felt like I had to be honest about that. Jamila and I both decided we were going to be very personal and honest in writing this book, and I thought, well, it's not a particularly flattering thought that I had, but it's important to include it because, yeah, it is really hard to describe what it is I deal with. I mean, essentially, my psychiatrist, who I've been seeing for a long time, has always... chase it! He's always hesitated to give me, an official diagnosis, although you have to for things like the PBS and Medicare and all of that stuff. But he just says, Rosie, you have a series of trauma symptoms that you deal with as an adult because of the prolonged exposure to toxic stress you had as a child. I don't talk much about my childhood in this book. I did that in my first memoir because I explained to people that trauma, and particularly childhood trauma, is the injury rather than the event itself. So I sort of describe in the book that if my childhood, with parents who were drug addicts and alcoholics and mentally ill themselves, and my sisters and I were in and out of the foster system, if you look at my childhood as the car crash, then the trauma symptoms I deal with now, that's the brain injury caused by that car crash. But that's, it's even the way I've given quite a long-winded answer to this question. It's hard to, I have felt at times it would be a lot easier to just point at a scan and say, there it is. But, I mean, again, with the false binary, Jamila and I realized we had entered into when we, as opposed to the initial premise of this book, over the course of writing it, doing the research that we did, we realized that my brain probably does look different on a scan because, the brain of children is developing so crucially and so much in the first 5 years. And my neural pathways would be very different. They would have developed very differently because of the neglect and abuse that I was going through at the time. There'd be parts of my brain that are overdeveloped, other parts that are underdeveloped. And I remember when I realized that, I had a bit of relief almost. And I realized then too that all these ideas we have about mental health and things not feeling legitimate, and the very thing I was trying to tell through my stories in this book, I'm not immune to that stuff either, because as soon as I found out, oh, your brain actually probably is physically different on a scan, I thought yes, see? Now I do have the scan. And I think what I realized by the time I got to the end of this book was the scan shouldn't make a difference. My symptoms are the same no matter what my brain looks like or what I have to show to people. But it's tricky comparing and contrasting our two stories. And I was very scared about putting my stuff next to, we were writing the book to hopefully help people understand these things together. But a huge part of me has been panicked, when your stories are next to the stories of someone who had a craniotomy for a 1 in a million brain tumor, it's not gonna look that bad, is it? It's all of that stuff is tied up in everything we've written in there.
Did you feel in the process of writing the book, you came to almost take your trauma more seriously then in that kind of framework of thinking? Did you come to a conclusion about it where you genuinely feel that now, or do you still question yourself being alongside Jamila's story?
It's hard not to. I think you just have to clock that stuff when you feel it because it's ingrained in us, It's like I said, I'm not immune to those kind of attitudes either. I've been in therapy since I was 17. I started getting pretty traditional PTSD symptoms when I was about 17, so flashbacks and that kind of thing. And then it's, my trauma's manifested in various different ways over the last almost 20 years. More than 20 years. I turned 39 yesterday. I just shaved 3 years off my age. I think what writing this book helped me realize, and I think it came from the delays we we're 5 years over deadline because Jamila had a regrowth in her tumour that she had to go back into radiotherapy for and have another surgery for. And then about a year after that, I had a pretty significant mental health relapse, dealing with a legal case to do with some abuse my sisters and I went through in the past in foster care. And so that really triggered a lot of stuff. So then I struggled with that. And the delay, I think, humbled us both because we both realised, we were approaching writing this book as if we were doing okay, we were doing well, like we were doing okay, and we were like writing this book about, and then we both had this delay because we both got so unwell again. And we both kind of realised that we had been living in a way that we'd been looking at our illness as if one day we will be well, one day there'll be an end point and we'll be well. And Jamila talks in the book and has talked in a lot of the interviews we've done over the last month about how the first couple of years after her tumour diagnosis, she put herself into the emergency room so many times because she was refusing to acknowledge the way her body and brain and life had adjusted, and she wanted to just keep going back to the person she had been before. And I'd always lived in this way of one day I won't have these trauma symptoms, I won't have this nervous system stuff, I won't have the anxiety or the dissociation or the, all of this stuff that I deal with, the panic attacks, the suicidal ideation, like one day I'll be well and then my life will start then, but that's not now, it's too hard. When I'm well, my life will start. And what Jam and I realised over the course of writing this book was like our life's happening now, and we probably both have to accept that. I don't know if it's me taking my trauma more seriously, but it's being more realistic about the fact that there are symptoms here that I will be dealing with for the rest of my life. There is no end point of wellness. Like, I think being well has to do with learning to manage your symptoms and manage your illness condition, whatever it is you have, and accepting the life you have now. And I think we both went through a bit of a grieving process having to accept that. And I joke that, I was like 17 years into treatment and Jamila was like 4. So of course she's always the overachiever. Like, we both came to the same realization on very different timelines, but at around the same time. And so, we integrated that into the book too, like this sort of grieving process you have to go through, accepting that your life is probably going to look quite different to what you had always hoped or expected or planned. That can be hard to deal with, and we don't shy away from that in the book. We didn't want this to be a kind of airport read that's really easy to sum up in one sentence. Like, that was a part of the book where we were both very honest about the fact that, like, it does just feel really fucking unfair sometimes, and you feel like a lot of grief and anger at the condition you have to deal with, but also your condition isn't your fault, but it is your responsibility to do something about it, to live responsibly and the best, most like healthy version of life you can. And realizing that over the last 5 years, I think writing the book really helped me realize it, means that I've approached my treatment in a much different way, because I'm not looking to some fantasy endpoint where I don't have any symptoms at all. I've accepted that maybe being well is accepting that I'll always have these symptoms, and I have the capacity, skill to manage them. So I don't know if that's taking it more seriously, but it's certainly meant that I've turned a massive corner in my treatment the last few years. Realising that has really helped.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think that even hearing Rosie explain that, like, you get a sense of just how valuable this text is for anybody who is living with these conditions or any conditions like them. So the book kind of explores all these like different facets of your life, right? Mm-hmm. But lived through the broken brain. And I wanted to start off by talking about love and relationships, because that's something that comes up. And you make this really interesting point in there. I think that many of us would have heard that idea that, you can't be in love until you love yourself. And like, it's such an easy thing to say, but you kind of have a counter argument to that point. And I think it's so fun to go through.
Yeah. You know, I think it does have to do with, you know, the physical, biological stuff in the brain that trauma can cause, particularly, you know, trauma caused in those first few years of life. They say that, you know, there's that, I call it, I think, Instagram meme of like, once, you know, if you haven't found the love of your life, it's because you don't love yourself yet. And as soon as you love yourself, like some magical door opens, and then that will allow you to be loved by another. And the thing with that is, when you've been through particularly this kind of damage from this kind of trauma in your early childhood life, you biologically are wired probably to not love yourself. Like that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And I would think, you know, what are you going to do? Are you going to be like 95 on Tinder? Like finally I'm at peace with myself. Quick, like I've got it. Like I'm open and the green light's on and now. And I you know, came to realize that the neural pathways in the brain that are like quite severely damaged through inconsistent like interpersonal relationships as a kid, they can be rewired and healed by consistent, stable and loving interpersonal relationships as an adult. Like the brain's, you know, it's neuroplasticity. The elastic can move in different directions. And I had always struggled in romantic relationships, I think, because I did feel like that is something for when I'm well. When I'm well, I'll have a successful relationship and I'll get married and I'll have kids then, because I can't yet because I'm not well yet, but when I'm well, I will. And what I came to realize, you know, in the last sort of 5 years of my life is that maybe it can go the other way around, because if you are incapable of believing you're loved until someone is there loving you, then maybe you need to let that happen first. And it's a very scary, confronting thing, but it's only after realizing that I've, you know, been in probably the most successful romantic relationship of my adult life. I'm also incredibly lucky that the man I'm with now is basically an emotional unicorn. And I say that in the book. I say, you know, it's one thing to realize, oh, maybe it's okay to let someone love me first, because biologically that's what my brain needs. But then you're like, but you still need someone good to do that. And I mean, I joke a lot that James, my partner, you know, his life's work has been dealing with and caring for children with special needs. And I was like, well, that's essentially what my brain is. So he probably is the perfect unicorn person to be with me. But I also mentioned in the book that rewiring those neural pathways to make you, to sort of fix that stuff in your brain, it doesn't only come from romantic connection. Like it comes from any of the stable, consistent, caring human relationships you have in your life. And so when I look back over my life, in hindsight, there's been people stepping up in that way for many years, of whom Jamila is one. My psychiatrist is another. I think he understood pretty early on that I was repairing a lot of broken stuff just by the consistency and stability I had with him. And there were times throughout my adulthood I couldn't afford to pay him, and he let me keep coming. Like he would bulk bill me because I think he understood that. So yeah, I think sometimes you do need to be loved first before you can realize that you're lovable, but it doesn't only apply to romantic relationships.
I love so much how you challenge that. I just
Yeah.
thought it was so brilliant.
Thank you.
Another part of the book that I found like particularly heart-wrenching, I guess, you know, when you work in media and we have very similar careers overall, and like you speak about a work opportunity that sort of fell through because you were dealing with the experience of having this like complex trauma. And I wonder, you know, you talk about that as this big kind of almost like failure in your career, but I wonder how you look back on it now that you just weren't able to meet the expectations in those moments?
Yeah. Like that was probably the chapter in the book I was most nervous about, because I've always tied a lot of my self-worth, possibly all of it, to my career. And even as a little kid, I was very good writer, very good at storytelling, very good at all that kind of thing, and that I sort of got attention and adoration for that from when I was young. So I've always tied a lot of my self-worth to what I can develop and contribute to the world creatively, and then I made it my job. And so when there are times when my mental health has prevented me from working, it's meant I've had a very fragile scaffolding or none to fall back on. I've dealt with extreme feelings of worthlessness and shame about being unable to work at times. And there is a chapter in the book about someone who I only refer to as a very important movie star, who offered me the chance to do something that's been my dream since I was a little kid. I've always wanted to win the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay, and back then I would be starring in it as well, but I adjusted my expectations on that over the years. But and this, very famous movie star became aware of my work and reached out to me and commissioned me to write a screenplay for her. And, it was like literally getting handed my dream on a silver platter, like the opportunity I had been working towards my entire life. And coinciding with getting that opportunity was a pretty bad relapse in my trauma symptoms. And what goes along with my trauma stuff when it gets quite bad is I get a lot of suicidal ideation. So that becomes something that really kind of takes over just it on a daily basis. It's very difficult to ignore. It's like the main thing in my brain. And I've been in therapy long enough to understand that not to follow through on those feelings. Like I understand intellectually that they're a symptom and they're a sign. When I get that ideation, it's a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign I need to, look like something's going on. And but it doesn't make it any easier to deal with that stuff. And so I had about 2 years almost across from about 2020 to the end of 2022 where I could barely work, I could barely function, and I couldn't get that screenplay done. I couldn't get the project done. I just couldn't do it. And I have tried explaining to people, like, if you ever need an example of like, I don't want this to be happening to me, that is it. Because what I wouldn't have given to do that, and there was nothing preventing me from doing it. The project was there, she wanted to pay me, she had the ability to make this movie a big deal, and it was right, it'd been given to me, like I said, on a silver platter, but I was so mentally unwell at the time that I couldn't do it. But I was the person who wanted to do it more than anyone else in the world. And I find it difficult to not feel shame about stuff like that. It's very hard. I know you asked, the question was like, do I look back on it now with more compassion? I try to, but it's hard. It's really hard. I think the most important thing you can do when it comes to the way your chronic health condition, whatever it may be, affects your life in ways that frustrate you or in ways that you feel shame about, particularly that's usually around work, because that's about not being able to deliver on something that other people expect of you. All you can do is aim to be more compassionate and gentle with yourself. But, I know that I'm not always going to get there, but I aim for it as best I can. So probably a little less shame about it right now, but in my darker moments, I still, feel really awful about that. And it's why I was most scared to put that chapter in the book, because it made me feel like, you're admitting that you couldn't do the thing. You couldn't do the thing.
Yeah, I mean, it hits me so hard because I want to like shake you almost and be like, you're so incredible. You're just like such an amazing person. And then when you read this, like you can feel the shame about it. And I understand the shame as well because I feel like I've been there like in very small examples of that. But I understand it. And I just think it was a really courageous thing to put in the book, actually.
Yeah, thank you.
We've only got a couple of questions left before we hand over to a Q&A, but it's probably maybe a bit of a tricky question, but I'm interested in your thoughts on this.
Okay, go.
I mean, you're a public persona, for the want of a better term, but, you speak very openly about this complex trauma. I guess I'm wondering, do you think that it's made it more difficult for you to deal with aspects of that? Do you think it makes it easier? I'm interested in your perspective on like sharing your story in such an open way.
That's a question this is the end of a month-long book tour, and that's the first time I've been asked that question. Possibly a bit of both. I mean, there's chapter in the book where I open the chapter with a pretty awful message someone sent me about how open and public I am about mental health stuff. I think the woman was trying to be helpful, but it was essentially like, get over your childhood, you're the one keeping yourself locked in this, like if you just, you need to let go of the past and then you will be free kind of thing. And I that's the kind of nightmare thing that you think everybody thinks about you. But it also was a moment in which I could realize, like, oh, this is someone who just fundamentally doesn't understand how trauma works. Like, I don't think about my childhood much at all. It's an odd thing for her to have said because, if someone was in an accident 30 years ago and had lost their leg and then today was telling you about how difficult some aspects of life can be because they don't, they only have one leg now, you wouldn't say, the accident was 30 years ago, get over it. Like, they're trying to explain how their life is now. And I mean, like I said, I don't really talk much about my childhood in this book because it's more about what I'm dealing with today. And so it can be difficult when people just fundamentally misunderstand what it is I deal with day to day, but also like I've been a storyteller my whole life. It's how I process things for myself, and it's what I find, like, I take great privilege in being able to articulate things in a way that maybe other people can't. Like, I feel incredibly lucky to have this skill, and it means I can articulate things in a way that maybe will change the way women like that think. It also means, all of what I do in my writing is I write from a very personal place most of the time, and I'm just looking for connection, like for myself and for others. And I want people to feel seen, and it helps me feel seen also. And so if what I write is able to articulate something in a way that someone has felt that way but has not been able to explain it that way themselves or doesn't have the ability to, and through the way I've written it, they feel seen and heard and understood, like I really consider that a great privilege to be able to do that. But yeah, that's why there's a whole chapter I write in the book about often being in two minds about whether or not I wish I'd ever said anything about this stuff. Jamila talks about being very quiet about her tumour stuff for a long time because she was very worried about becoming brain tumour girl. And I've talked about like knowing that a lot of people will always consider me, besides Batchy Recap Girl, like childhood trauma girl. Like, and so there may be some people who there are always going to be that kind of response to this sort of thing, but the writing of it and the creative output of what I do always outweighs the bad parts. Yeah.
I love that. Just a final question. If you could give everybody in the audience one takeaway from the book to consider for the rest of the afternoon, for the rest of the year, what would it be?
I say this a few times in the book, and I say it all the time in my life, that particularly with mental health, but also with any kind of, chronic medical condition, like I said before, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to do something about it. At the end of the day, it really is. The things that happened to me in my childhood, I know they're not my fault. Like, I know that they are, just horrifically unfair. And I could get swallowed up by that and think, well, it's unfair what I went through, so it shouldn't be on me now to fix it, because that just is even more unfair. But then where would I be, It's my responsibility to live in the best way I can. And, I was in Rebecca Huntley's session just before this one, and she said something that I also say, in that it's a responsibility to yourself, but it also is to others, and particularly so the trauma stops with you. Like, I would very much like for the trauma passed down from my parents to me to stop with me, and to not affect anyone negatively around me. So it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to do something about it.
Yeah, it's such a powerful message.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that I'll hand over my mic, and
Sure,
then
sure.
if anybody has a question, please pop your hand up.
Maybe front row. I was wondering if you've ever considered this book becoming a screenplay or a movie, and if you have, who would play you and Jamila?
Also another question we have not got. No. And so no, I hadn't considered that. And now I'm trying to think of a very flattering answer for Jamila, because she'd want to know what I said. Oh my gosh, I don't know. I think, to be honest, and I realised this as I got older too, that I'm far more suited to television as a medium than film. I think I would be more excited to win an Emmy rather than an Oscar. And I think this book would probably lend itself better to television, because there's so many stories in this book. It's, Jamila and I top and tail each chapter, a story from her at the start, one from me at the end, but in the middle are the interviews that Jamila did with a bunch of just incredible people who are generous to share their stories. So some people who have dealing with health issues themselves, some people who are caring for others, medical professionals, all that kind of thing. So I think it would need, we'd need eight episodes to get to all of those, rather than a screenplay. On the actors, man, leave it with me. Leave it with me. But yeah, good question.
Hi, I've been a big fan of yours for a long time, and I've
thank
always
you.
wanted to ask.
Yeah.
So many years ago, Roxanne Gay went to the Mamma Mia studio,
Yeah.
and you wrote a response about how frustrated you were with how they described her, right?
Mhm, yeah.
And I 100% read that and went, oh my God, and that was probably the moment where I thought, yeah, you're one to watch, because you called out what was pretty bad behaviour. Did she read that? I just wondered if she ever responded.
So Roxanne Gay was interviewed by Mia Friedman at Mamma Mia, and in the intro of the podcast, I think, and also in the way the written post along to describe it, was some pretty upsetting and fat-phobic language. And I was no longer working at Mamma Mia at the time, but I was at that point the only fat woman who had ever worked there, so everyone was reaching out to me for comment about it, because Roxanne Gay did tweet how offended she was by the way she had been described and treated. And so, yeah, a lot of people reached out to me. And I messaged Mia before I tweeted, and I said, everyone's asking me to comment. I wouldn't be comfortable going on the record with a reporter, but I am really upset by how this went down. I worked there for quite a few years and thought I was getting through to the team obviously more than I had. And so I I did tell her before I tweeted what I was going to tweet. So yeah, she read it because I sent it to her first.
I mean,
Did Roxanne respond?
did she know that you supported her?
Oh, she did. She messaged me too. Yeah, she messaged me too. Oh, sorry, I misunderstood. But yeah, she messaged me also, and yeah, that was just a disappointing situation all round. But yeah. No. I just surprised. Like, it was surprised by the question. Like, yeah, it just was a while ago. But yeah, happy to answer though. Happy to answer on that. Yeah. Maybe one more. Yeah.
I'm just going to sneak around here. Mine is really quick.
Okay.
I just love the question about the screenplay and you saying the television series. So mine's not a question, it's just a suggestion.
Yes.
I was thinking, have you ever seen Offspring?
I have.
Asher Kelly.
I was in the writer's room for Offspring for a couple
I reckon
seasons. Yeah.
she's such a good actress. I would
Yeah.
like to see her as you.
Yeah. Oh.
Blonde and attractive.
Yeah.
Playing
No.
the part.
Oh yeah. I'd take Asher Keddy any day. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the suggestion. Are we wrapping up? Is there 5 minutes? We could do one more question.
One more question. Oh, I'm getting my steps.
Sorry.
Fitbit's going to love me.
Has anyone ever made you a lasagna since the book has come out?
I will say on Jamila, after I told her that day, there wasn't a time in the years since then that I've not been doing well that she hasn't sent me some kind of food. So, I do think often people have asked Jamila and I a lot on this tour, how can we show up for those in our lives who are going through some kind of health crisis or condition or whatever it may be, and our answer tends to always be just don't be scared of doing or saying the wrong thing. Like, the worst thing you can do is just not do anything at all. Just show up, even in the most, seemingly minor of ways, like sending cupcakes with my face on them, which she has done. But Jamila gave me a lasagna at the start of this tour. And actually, yeah, when my mum took her own life last year, I got a lot of lasagnas. And I think it's because Jamila and I had done a bit of press about this book coming out because we'd promised it was going to be ready in a year and then it wasn't. So I'd mentioned the lasagna story a few times, and I think people in my life really, in a quite lovely way, took notice of that. And when that happened last year, I did get sent a lot of lasagna-based frozen meals. So yeah, I think it may be a small thing, but I think what it really shows is that just showing up at all in even the smallest of ways is often like the best thing you can do. Yeah.
Well, I would love to give Rosie one massive round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.